Over the years, there have been some crazy things that have happened in NASCAR, things that we could never explain or never even predict to happen. But then there's also those weird things that never happened but could have. I've went over some of these before, but today I'm going to go over 8 more of these that I found that I think are really cool and could probably be something that would have changed NASCAR history forever in one way or another. So let's get right into it. The first one is Jeff Gordon almost retiring at the end of the 2000s, around 2008 or 2009. This was spurred on by his 2008 crash at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. If you were around to remember that one, you'll know that this was one of the hardest crashes probably any of us have ever seen a driver take. And Gordon, for some reason, had the worst possible luck when it came to hitting walls at terrible angles. Well, the crash caused him horrible back pain throughout 2008 and 2009. And by his mid-30s, he developed arthritis in his back, and it was really affecting his performance. If you look at his performance from 2008 to 2010, he only had 1 win in that time and was generally a non-factor for the championship, at least for the most part. In 2009, he ran better than the other 2 years, but it really wasn't to Jeff Gordon's standards. While he had a late career resurgence in 2011 and in 2014, this crash right here could have ended Gordon's career before we even saw any of that. Another weird thing that could have happened is that Daytona could have had a moat around it. Daytona currently has Lake Lloyd in the middle of it, and this is because they dug out the dirt in the infield to make the high banks that we see today in the turns in the tri-oval. Well, the thing that they were thinking about doing instead of infield dirt in the original plans were to dig out the dirt around the turns and the super stretch, creating a 4.5-mile infield road course as well, and also having maybe a drainage system into this moat. The only problems is that with water constantly surrounding the track and the primitive fencing that they had at the time, it meant that any crashes into the walls would have probably resulted in someone or something going underwater. And that's just something that couldn't happen. Also, it could have flooded the tunnels as the moat was going to go right next to the tunnels. And, well, if you know Florida, you know it rains a lot and you know that water levels are never going to be even. It also would limit the abilities that they had to build up the grandstands, which would have really hurt them in the 90s and 2000s. And Daytona wasn't the only one to have odd design layouts when it came to the original plans for a racetrack. The original plans for Chicagoland and Kansas Speedway were also really different than what we see today as well. These tracks popped up in the early 2000s mile-and-a-half cookie-cutter boom, and the original plan was to have grandstands around the entire track. That means that they were going to have grandstands through the turns, down the backstretch, everywhere. This would have seated over 200 to 250,000 at these tracks and would have made them one of the most attended, or at least one of the highest capacity tracks in NASCAR and in the world. Neither of these tracks ever reached above 80,000 seating capacity for their tracks, and Chicagoland Speedway is currently a ghost town. Speaking of the Chicagoland Speedway, as early as this year, the rumors had still been around that the Chicagoland Speedway was going to be the home of the Chicago Bears, possibly. The Bears right now are looking to leave Soldier Field in Chicago after, let's be honest, they ruined the design of Soldier Field. And one of the options was Chicagoland. Going there would have made kind of a bit of sense, seeing that there was tons of land for the stadium as well as the parking and amenities that would need to be built up around it. Plus, Joliet is a growing market when it comes to business and economy, so it might have helped, especially with it being a college town too. They seem to be going with Arlington Heights instead though, so Chicagoland Speedway still is on life support and not dead yet. Let's stay in the vein of the NFL. Old Minnesota Vikings head coach Dennis Green actually had aspirations in 2002 to become a part owner of a NASCAR team. You might know Dennis Green for his "they are who we thought they were" speech.
Now, if you want to crown them, then crown their ass. But they are who we thought they were, and we let them off the hook.
But he was one of the best coaches of the 90s and early 2000s. The Minnesota Vikings coach had the aspirations to go into NASCAR and seemed to actually be partnering up with different people. But every time something would seem to be built for this team, it would all come crumbling down. And by the next football season, all of his thoughts of being in NASCAR had since evaporated. Sticking with team ownership, you have the fact that there's been plenty of times that fans have tried owning NASCAR teams. Over the years, fans, just normal fans that is, have tried to pool their money together and try different business practices to field a truck team, an Xfinity team, and a lot of times a Cup team. Most that try to get other fans on board and get it through donations or get it through different sponsorship deals or work or whatever like that, and every single time it falls flat on its face. Some examples of this are the All-American Fan Racing Team, Fan-Base Motorsports, and Fans Enterprises. Moving on to a driver who at the time was moving on, did you know that Dale Earnhardt Jr. nearly didn't run the number 88 car? One of the designs they had before getting the 88 was the number 81, which was a number he drove when he owned Chance 2 Motorsports back in the NASCAR Busch Series days in the early 2000s. And there actually were designs for it. Here's one right here that is basically the design they were looking at running with the 81 car. Another option that Junior has said that they had on the table was the 28 car. The 28 hadn't been used in years, and at this point, Hendrick Motorsports and Dale Jr. thought, well, it's open, let's go for it. But Robert Yates Racing heard about it, and Robert Yates especially did, and they wanted to keep the number 28's legacy with Yates. So they offered Dale Earnhardt Jr. and HMS the number 88, because they were going to switch the number 88 team to the number 28 team. Well, with that, HMS got the 88, Dale Jr. drove the 88 for half of his career, and all of that is history. Now, the last thing that I'll talk about today is the fact that there were different variations of the chase that were proposed and ultimately struck down over time. In 2004, NASCAR introduced the Chase for the Nextel Cup. This got 10 drivers after 26 races to have their points reset and then compete in the last 10 races. And since then, it's been edited to 12 drivers, a different point system altogether has been put with it week over week, and now we have the playoff system where there's eliminations in this chase playoff format. Well, that was actually proposed in the early 2000s. Tournament bracket eliminations were originally proposed. There were propositions of having the 12 drivers in the chase in the 2010s go into a 5-race round and then a 5-race round to end it, where the 12 drivers would race those first 5 races, and then after that, 6 would be eliminated, and those last 6 remaining would be the 6 going for the championship in the last 5 races. Ultimately, never got adapted. There was a complete field bracket of full-time drivers where they'd have 1v1 in the last 10 races until they hit a final 4 or a final 8 for Homestead. And then there was even floated ideas like playoffs as far back as the 90s, and then even having playoff drivers need to hit a minimum speed during the race or be eliminated from said race, or need to be above a set amount of drivers by the end of the race or be eliminated from the race. There were a lot of different things that were proposed in the 2000s for it, all in an attempt to thwart what Matt Kenseth had done in 2003. Hell, there was even a chance of NASCAR's Cup Series being split into an East and West division and then ultimately brought back for big races and championship races to compete against one another in 50-car fields. None of these, again, ever made the light of day for the most part, but it's kind of crazy to think where NASCAR could have headed, and to be honest, NASCAR could have ended out a lot worse than it did with these systems we have today. Now with that, I'm going to pass these all to you. Did you know that some or all of these things could have happened in NASCAR? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like on this video. Share this video and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. To all my channel members, thank you for your support. And until next time, have a good one.